And good day, everyone. This is David Cross with you today, and I'm going to walk through the virtual Sapphire Executive setup with the VMware ESXi server and the different options that you'll have for the configuration. What your prerequisites are in this is the VM Sapphire appliance image, whether that's going to be the X20 or X10 image. I'm going to use the VM Sapphire X20. In the VMware ESXi components, you're going to want to deploy a VM from an OVA or OVF file. And I'm going to go ahead and create and just drop this from the files in our image. The setup of this, the key to, is to not allow the image to start automatically. What we need to do at this point when the VM is created is we need to attach a DVD CD device, and then we need to mount an ISO. That's going to be the IPControl software. So you should also have, as part of this, a IPControl ISO for your version of the executive. 10.0.43 would be the latest. And that ISO you should upload to the ESXi server, storing it onto a data store that's accessible to this VM when you load this. So it is a prerequisite for the executive, so we want to make sure that that is available. So I'm going to go ahead and enable my network and keep it on thin provisioning, but disable the automatic startup. And it's going to go ahead and create this, and I'm going to come right back to it when it's done. Okay, and our image is complete, so I'm going to go ahead and edit that image. And in the edit, I want to go ahead and add a new device. And I want this to be a CD DVD. And I specifically want to mount the ISO file, which you would have uploaded for your version of IPControl. So the 10.0.43 is the ISO I'm going to select. And in my executive, I'm going to go ahead and edit this, but you would maintain the core CPU memory and so forth. Also key to know here is the network adapter. Keep these connected in the VM guest so that they can be properly indexed when they're loaded in the Sapphire. But also note that you can disable the network connectivity from the Sapphire menu. So we want to go ahead and maintain that. And we want to go ahead and power the system on. And when our menu is started up, key to the executive setup is to select menu option number 1 until the option is Sapphire EX system. The number 2 option should default to the executive, but the 2 options here are cloud automation and executive, and video number 2 will actually go through the cloud automation. So there is a series there for that setup as well. We're going to go ahead and give this a name. And we're going to go ahead and give it an IP address. I do have a DNS server, and I do have a time server that I want this to use in its settings. And key to note on the hypervisor, do not leave it as hypervisor. Time will drift over time if it doesn't have a persistent NTP server. So go ahead and set that when you can. And we're going to go ahead and set my time zone at least for Eastern time zone. Now I want to maintain the rest of these settings as defaults, and I'm going to go ahead and hit Y to continue. It's going to prompt me for the install of the IPControl software. I'm going to hit enter. And this is going to unpack some files. And when it's done, it's going to prompt us again to detach the ISO. And you can either go ahead and detach it from the VM. It might give you a message that it's in use. Just hit done or enter to continue, and you can unmount it when the system reboots. So I'm going to hit enter. And I'm going to give this a minute and let it run through a couple of configurations, and I'll jump back in a few. Okay, one thing to note as the executive install is part of the install is the MySQL database if you select out that option. And so it is building a MySQL. It's going to load up the default schema and the initialization of it. And so that when we're done, we should be able to log in and apply the license key that we'll have, and you should have for as part of the evaluation or your production system. So we'll give this another minute and be right back. Your executive will also be where the APIs are hosted. There's a SOAP XML API as well as a RESTful API. And as we get into the cloud automation appliance, there is also those same APIs that it does proxy back to your primary and backup executives. So the API systems are there as well, and that'll be one of our future videos in the series. Okay, and the last step here is that it's finished installing and checking all the permissions is to restart the appliance. And like all systems, once this is rebooted, we should be at a login prompt. And our executive should be complete at that point, and we should be able to connect to the web interface once that has started up. Now, as I guess we're waiting for this to start as well, we can also start up another window. And your connection options here are to use HTTP or HTTPS by default, and those can be configured post setup. So let's go ahead and do HTTPS. And HTTPS is 8443. And if you are using HTTP, it would be 8080 on the ports. Now this will take a second as it started to unload all the Java files and ensure that everything is started. So this will take just a moment. And as our appliance is finished, we should be again at the login prompt. And when our web service starts up, just note that this takes anywhere from maybe a minute to 2 minutes, depending on how much resource you have on the VM. But your first connection, we do use self-signed, so you'll have to accept the security procedure here. And then for the login, using InkAdmin as your defaults, should bring you into the license key screen where you can then paste your evaluation production key, or lab key for that matter. So this is going to conclude our first video on the executive setup. The second video would be the cloud automation appliance setup. And then we're going to have, I think, 2 or so videos for that to kind of walk through the various settings. And then I think we'll follow up with a number of series of videos for how to walk through different components for the DNS setup, and then kind of putting this all together into a lab and creating some imports and so forth. So looking forward to this series of videos with you, and look forward to the next one. Thank you. Take care.